Hello and welcome. We're just waiting for some more people to join us as this Zoom webinar begins. It can take a little while for people to come and enter into the Zoom room. So you just bear with us for a few more seconds, then we'll begin properly. So those of you who are just entering now, we're just waiting for the room to fill up as people join. So we'll just be starting in a few seconds. It looks like we may be there. So I think with that, I'll begin. So hello and good afternoon, good evening or good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to this first in a series of a new series of webinars on mediation. So today we have Michael Brand, who will be looking at getting to grips with linguistic mediation. And he'll be using examples from our new General English course roadmap. Michael is a colleague. He's a teacher trainer for Pearson, who's taught in the UK and Spain, where he currently now lives. He's also a teacher on our live classes project, where he's been teaching online classes to teens around the world. So just a point of administration, when it comes to responding in the chat, and please, responding in the chat, please remember to, well, just put your comments in there, but if you can put them to panelists and attendees, just the message, then we can all read them, and as you respond to Michael. Anyway, so with that, I'll leave you with Michael. Over to you.
Thanks very much for that introduction, Richard. Right, let's begin, shall we? Good, I can see people are saying hello in the chat. Nice to meet you all. We've got people from all over the world, which is great to see. Still one or two people sending only to panelists. Do be sure to send to panelists and attendees so that everyone in the webinar can read what you have to say, because there will be times in the webinar when I ask for collaboration and ask you to do things. So it'd be great for you to be able to read one another's responses. Okay. Good morning. Good afternoon. So good morning in La Paz. Okay. Or good afternoon here from Spain. Okay. Okay. Good. So just before I start, I'll do a brief introduction so that you know who's talking to you. My name's Michael Brand, and I'm from England originally. I'm from the south of England in a place called Aylesbury, which is between Oxford and London, which are slightly more well-known places. I don't live in England, as Richard said. I live in Spain. I live in a lovely little village called Miraflores de la Sierra, which is just north of Madrid, just north of the capital. Personally, also in two of my hobbies are traveling, which I'm not doing quite as much at the moment, as I guess is true for everybody here, and riding my bike as well. Those are things that I like to do. Professionally, so I studied languages at university in a nice place called Durham, well worth a visit if you're ever in the north of England. I studied French and German, and I began my career as a French and German teacher in England. But then I moved to Spain, and in Spain I've been teaching English and French before becoming a teacher trainer for Pearson. So I do teacher training talks at conferences and institutions and online. And at the moment, it's all online, as you can imagine. Okay. Okay. As Richard alluded to before, there are a couple more webinars on mediation in this series. I'm kicking it off today. And then my colleague Letizia is going to be talking about mediation online and assessing mediation. So I do encourage you to sign up to those webinars. And I've put a quick URL, a tiny URL at the top here. So the tinyurl.com/mediation webinars, you'll be able to access those, sign up for those, and attend in a week's time, in 2 weeks' time, if you want to. Okay. Oh yeah, and it'd be good for you to have something to write on and a pen. That'd be lovely. You can make notes on the webinar if you like. You will be receiving a recording, of course, but there'll be a few tasks where I'll ask you to write something. So it'd be good to have a pen and paper handy. Okay. Right, mediation. So that's what we're here to talk about today. What is mediation? So I started my quest on mediation, on finding out what mediation is, by looking at a few films which have mediation or mediator in the title. Let's have a look, shall we? First one, mediation. A divorce mediation spins way out of control for a husband, his soon-to-be ex-wife, and their court-appointed mediator. worth a watch. On to the next one, Mediator. A tangled story of three men's lives on the gritty streets of Chicago. Manning, a dirty, disillusioned cop. Julian, king of drugs, thugs, and prostitution. And Frank, a ruthless politician who destroys everything in the way of his ambition. And finally, the Mediator. Nicole is estranged from her father and refuses all his attempts to reconcile with her. As a last-ditch effort, he creates a robot to act as a mediator between him and his daughter. So we have mediating a divorce, mediating with criminals, mediating between estranged family members using a robot. It looks like mediation is something to do with resolving conflicts, which is actually a reasonable start, but these film synopses haven't given us the answers we need, so we're going to continue looking. We're going to move to the dictionary. I'll let you just read the first line in the definition. Voting for the first one. Yeah, so there you've got some film recommendations for your Friday night. So if we look in the dictionary, we see that mediation is to end a quarrel between two people. So much like what we saw in the films, actually. Okay, this seems to be what people understand as mediation and mediating, if you like, in everyday life before getting into language teaching. Okay, what can you expect from the webinar today? We're going to be talking about mediation, and mediation is becoming something of a hot topic in ELT after the increasing importance that was placed on it and the appearance of can-do descriptors, learning objectives, in the 2018 companion volume to the Common European Framework. And in Spain, for example, where I'm based, official language schools, known over here as Escuelas Oficiales de Idiomas, they've been instructed to assess mediation, which has prompted an even more pronounced interest in the subject. Okay? So in the lesson today then, in the session, a bit like a lesson, what is mediation in language teaching? We're going to consider according to the Council of Europe. Why is it relevant now? We've alluded to that, but why is it relevant in today's society? How do I develop mediation sub-skills in my day-to-day teaching? Now, this question can have two meanings. It can mean, how are you already doing it? How are you already doing it, I should say? And what else can you do to develop it? Okay, because many of us we will already be developing mediation sub-skills. We're going to look at a way of accessing the Common European Framework descriptors for the level you're teaching very easily and how they're organized. We're going to move on from how we develop mediation sub-skills in our teaching already to a full mediation task. What might that look like? Plus, at the end, I'll be putting up a website where you can download some full mediation lessons, including teacher's notes and audio tracks where appropriate. These come from Pearson's New Adult Course Roadmap. Okay, so that's what you can expect from this webinar. All right. It's great to see some of you are putting in what you expect from the webinar as well, Ruben. Okay, I hope you do get some strategies to apply in class, Ruben. Okay. So when we talk about mediation in language teaching, what do we mean? Just be great to get a few ideas in the chat box just before I go on talking. So what do you understand about mediation? Okay, my business communication. Okay, solving disputes relating to arbitration. Yeah, that's a definition we've been looking at so far, I would say. Okay, thanks, Ben, for that. Can anyone add to what Ben has put in there? Jessica says interaction. Somebody says a used roadmap. Remember to send your messages to panelists and attendees, guys, because that means that everyone can read them. Okay, triangle between you, the text, and somebody else. That's a really nice way of putting it. Thanks for that, Marta. Conveying information in another way, retelling information, making it available, compromising. Okay, I can see there's considerable knowledge in the room already. So for my sort of definition, I'm going to lean on the companion volume. Okay, and I'm going to just talk about the definition that they have in there. Okay, so here we go. So I'll let you just sort of read what I've got in green. So a mediator then creates meaning or passes it on and builds bridges over gaps in understanding. So helps somebody understand. Okay. So mediation can occur in an interlingual scenario, so between languages. It could be the language that's the problem, but it doesn't have to be. It can occur in an intralingual context too, within the same language. Okay. So mediation is to do with what we can do with language to make learning and communication possible. Okay. Collaboration, so it's making meaning together. Collaboration is a big part of mediation. It's a big part of the descriptors. It's about bringing other people into play, as we'll see. Passing on information in appropriate form. Somebody alluded to that. So it could be passing on information that's written in a spoken form or vice versa, modifying the register, attending to cultural sensibilities, or to what the person you're mediating to needs to know. Okay, and mediation can take place in different contexts. Okay, so we're starting to kind of define the concept. Let's move on. In the companion volume, mediation is divided into 3 areas, I'd say. One of them is mediating a text. So it involves passing on to another person the content of a text to which they don't have access. And this could be because of different reasons. Linguistic, as we said, it could be between languages, but also within a language. May you not have a sufficient linguistic level to access it in their own language, even if the text is in their language. Could be cultural considerations of it. Some of the cultural references they won't understand. Could be the language is too technical. Okay, so it's mediating a text, giving somebody access to a text. Mediating concepts. So this is facilitating access to concepts or to knowledge if they can't directly access it on their own. So this is something we do in everyday life. So I've got a couple of young children actually. One of they're 3 and 5, and I think I'm mediating concepts all day long. They're always asking me questions, and I'm trying to give them answers and give them what I know about their questions in a way that they can understand. Okay, teaching, of course, is mediation as well. So the teacher knows a lot more than the students and is trying to impart that knowledge in a way that the students can access. Of course, it's not only teaching isn't just, transferring knowledge. Of course, the students do a lot on their own, and they should be doing a lot on their own, but they're certainly part of it. And mediation can also be mediating communication. And I think this is the type of mediation that we were looking at in the films and the dictionary definition, shaping successful communication between two or more people who may have different, cultural, linguistic, intellectual backgrounds or differences as well. Okay, so those are the 3 areas of mediation. Moving on with the companion volume, we've got this rather large chart, sort of flow kind of diagram, whatever its technical name is, and you can see the 3 areas that we've just we've looked at, and the sort of the sub areas that are involved in each of those. So these are things you need to be able to do. And each of these areas has with it a list of descriptors, a list of specific can-do descriptors, which we're going to be looking at as we go through. Okay? Okay, good. So the companion volume then is a 235-page document. It's free to download. And it involves, I just tried to open it, I didn't need to. And then 26 of those pages are on mediation. So if you're interested in mediation, reading those 26 pages makes sense. It's kind of getting it from the horse's mouth, as it were. Okay. Okay, good. But why mediation now? Why, apart from it being in the companion volume, why is mediation so relevant in the world that we live in? Okay, so let's have a look. Now, it depends on what you define as being a native speaker, and this is a grey and a sort of controversial area in itself. And again, it depends on the statistics you look at, but I've read that about 1 in 5 English speakers has English as their first language. Okay, Jeremy Harmer in PELT, Practice of English Language Teaching, cites that 97% of English teachers don't have English as their first language. Somebody like David Crystal talks about different Englishes, different kind of variations of English around the world. And all of this is going to require mediation, isn't it? You have a French and a Japanese businessman speaking English to one another. There might be linguistic and cultural gaps there. Mediation may be required. Okay, so those are a few reasons why mediation is important in the world we live in. We live in the information age, as is often said. So much information out there in so many different forms, and often when we access information, we'll pass it on to somebody, pass on, you know, what was relevant, even in a film that we saw, and that's mediation. Okay, people work across fields. So I work in Pearson as a teacher trainer. I work with different departments, you know, a sales department, a content and editing department, a finance department, and we don't all speak the same language. So if I'm talking to teachers, as I am today, about methodology, I might change my discourse slightly if I'm talking to, let's say, somebody in the finance department who's not a teacher, all these areas of methodology. Similarly, in the finance department, they come up with these big spreadsheets full of numbers and color coded about how the company's doing, and it's I don't always understand it. So it needs to be made accessible to me. Somebody needs to mediate it to me. Okay, so lots of working across fields that necessitates mediation. You might recognize some of these kind of acronyms and I would say trends in education, and all of these will require mediation. Excuse me. And finally, we live in more and more in an interconnected, globalized world, and that in itself, although that's had a sort of a temporary pause this year, that in itself is going to require mediation as countries and cultures get, you know, more and more closely linked. Okay, so good. I think we'll call that our introduction. Sort of trying to get to grips with defining mediation and why it's necessary, or why it's a fact of the world that we live in. Let's move on now with teaching examples of mediation. Okay, so I'm just gonna for this part, you're gonna have to humor me and be students. Okay, so you're gonna do an actual task for me. So I'm gonna get you, please, to read the blue box, if you will. So a charity challenge. So when I was younger, when I went to school, I used to do things for charity. It was very popular in my school. For example, we would all run round a field, and we would, before doing that, we'd go home and ask our parents and grandparents to sponsor us. They'd sponsor us for every lap of the field, maybe 10 pence. And then when we did 10 laps, we got £1, and we'd give that money to charity. So the further we ran, the more money we made for charity. And the charity we agreed on together, it was perhaps an animal charity, a children's charity, a cancer research charity, things like that. So that's my experience of doing things for charity. Anyone here done anything for charity? Any kind of charity events or fun runs? Put it in the chat box, please, if you'd like to contribute. Oh, dance-a-thons. Jessica's done some dance-a-thons. Great. Clothes drive. Selling homemade cookies. Nice. Okay. Helping in animal shelters. Great stuff, Natalia. Okay, so there's a few. Donating money, yeah. Then you can just donate money directly to charity, of course. Okay, good. Okay, so this is our lesson. Then there was a bit the content of our lesson, hiking for charity. The goal of the lesson is to understand the presentation. That's what we want our students to move towards. You can't learn how to understand any presentation in one lesson, but you can sharpen sub-skills. And what we're trying to sharpen here is listening for specific information. That's what we're going to be working on in this lesson. Okay. So in real life, if you're listening out to some kind of announcement, and there's certain details you want to pick out, what might you do with those details? What might you do in real life there? Any ideas in the chat box? Listening out to an announcement, it's got some important details that you need. What might you do with those details when you hear them? I can see we've got in the chat box people popping in their charity. Okay, so Natalia's said make notes. This was actually sort of a display question. It was what I was getting at. Yeah, we're talking about note taking. Okay, we're talking about note taking. Again, if I could get you just to read the red box and tell me how can you prepare for making your notes? How can you prepare according to this box? How can you prepare for your note taking? To make it clear to yourself what it is you want to do. Yeah, so Jessica says by writing down the questions you have. Okay, so that can help you understand what it is you're looking for. Okay, okay, and we're actually going to do this. So we're going to do part of this task. I'm going to play you a part of a listening, and they're going to talk about the route we're going to take on this charity challenge, this Pyrenean hike. Okay, but let's ask some questions about the type of details we want to pick out. So guys, if you can help me on this, we're going on a hike and we want to know about the route. What questions can we ask about the route? What specific details are interesting for us, I should say? Please put any ideas in the chat box. What could we want to know about the route? When, how long? How long is it? How difficult? Type of terrain? How many days we've got? Time? Fitness level? What's the weather going to be like on the route? If there's traffic, where is it? Start and end point. Okay. Well, there are loads of questions. Okay, I've selected a few here, guys. So if you like, you can write down these questions so you can actually do the task as a student. Okay, so there are so many that you've popped in the chat box. I've selected a few. So again, how long is it? And in terms of days and time, how many days does it take, and how much time we'd be walking for? That's our first detail to pick out. How difficult is it? What type of terrain is there? What fitness level is required? What's the weather like? And what's the start and end point? Okay, so I'll repeat that. How long is it in terms of days and time? How difficult is it? What type of terrain is it? What fitness level do you need? What's the weather like? and what's the start and end point. Okay, so we got our details, and you guys are going to have a listen to part of the track and try to pick out those details. You can write them down. Okay, you can write them down.
Unit 7, Recording 10.
Well, thank you everyone for your interest in our Pyrenean Charity Challenge. I hope you can all hear me okay? Okay, so what are you signing up for? We'll walk 40 kilometers in 3 days through the beautiful scenery of the Spanish Pyrenees. The routes will take us through a variety of landscapes. First, we'll follow a spectacular trail along the coast. Then we'll head away from the coast and walk through hills and forest. We will walk approximately 16 kilometers per day. It should take us about 6 to 7 hours. Each day's walking will start from one hotel and finish at the next hotel on the route. We'll walk at a relaxed speed, so this challenge is no problem if you're a fit and active person. Previous experience is useful, but is not absolutely necessary.
Right, we're going to stop that there. We're not going to do the whole thing. So we were able to pick out our details. I think we were. I'm not going to go through and get you to give me each answer in turn, because I'm sure we were able to do the exercise. I think we got how long it was. The 40K, 3 days, wasn't it? The difficulty, it was a relaxed pace, wasn't it? The terrain, the Pyrenees, a spectacular trail, the hotel to hotel. Okay, so we picked out the details that we set out to pick out. Okay, good. So
Unit 7, Recording 10.
Excuse me. I think doing the task once is enough. Okay. So the next task in the actual lesson is to try to complete a gap fill here, as you can see, with your notes, and then speak about the charity challenge. Okay. Okay. Now, it's picking out specific information from a listing. That's not, it won't be something new. Why am I talking about it? Well, the first one, the first point to make is here we made our own questions. So sometimes nice to ask students what they want what information they want to get out of a text or of listening, and then listen for that. Sometimes if questions come from the students more motivated to try and do them, to try and solve them. But the main reason we're there is, okay, we're supposed to be talking about mediation here. Why am I doing a listening exercise with you? This is a mediation webinar. Where's the mediation? Where's the beef? Yeah. And my point here is that in the descriptors for mediation, note-taking is actually alluded to quite a lot. So note-taking is a sub-skill that's relevant for mediation. So if you think, remember we said mediation, part of it is passing on what's relevant from a text or concept to somebody else. You can imagine that note-taking is relevant to be able to carry that out, to be able to mediate. So that's why they're making the point there that if any of you have had your students make notes, as we did in your classes, you're already developing a mediation sub-skill. Okay, so more of these examples. Have you ever had your students take notes? Have you ever had your students introduce someone else to the class? Perhaps on the first day of term, you get them finding out about one another and then introducing a partner. Have you ever done that? Do you ever have your students working together on a group task, making suggestions? Do you ever have your students summarizing? Could be a written or a spoken text. Do you ever have your students asking questions to check they've been understood? So as teachers, we do this all the time, right? We ask questions to check the students understand us rather than just saying, do you understand me? Can we get our students to ask each other questions to check their understanding each other? Okay. Have you ever had your students explain a bar graph or a chart or some kind of infographic? Have you ever done read a story with your students and had them relate it to their own experiences? have you ever had your students invite others in the class to speak? So again, common thing for a teacher to do, but can we get students trying to bring one another into a discussion? Can you get the students asking each other to justify their opinions? Can you have your students repeating what one of their peers has said to show that they understand? One scenario, one situation you can do this in is a debate. So sometimes in a debate, you can have group A, someone in group A states their position and makes an argument. Now someone in group B is going to respond, but before they can respond, they have to restate what the person in team A just said to their satisfaction before they can continue. Okay, so it's to prove they've been listening. It's a good way of showing you're listening. Okay. Do you get your students to give examples to make something clearer? What about explaining a task to a student who doesn't understand? I'm sure you do this. I'm sure we do this. So often we'll explain a task to students and someone says, oh, I don't understand. And of course the teacher can just go straight in and explain it again, or they can open it out to the class and say, well, can anyone help? Can anyone help with this? Can anyone help this student out? Then you'd be sharpening a mediation soft skill. Okay. What about writing a report of a class discussion? Maybe your students are discussing a certain topic, but before we start, we get one of the students to make notes on the class discussion, to be kind of a scribe, and then when it's finished, that person can write a report on what was said in the discussion and present it, and then the students can decide whether that accurately reflected the direction the discussion took, I should say. Writing that report would be an example of mediation as well. Do you have your students translating? So all of these things we do in class, or certainly we could do, some of us maybe do some, but not others, all come from mediation descriptors. So I'm trying to kind of hammer home the point that many of us are developing mediation soft skills already. It's just we haven't labeled it as mediation. Okay. This is just, I've just taken 5 of them to go with their descriptors. Okay, the first one, introducing someone. Second one, working together. Next one, summarizing. Next one is being hidden by my chat box, so I'm gonna have to move it. Asking questions to check they've been understood. Yeah, and finally the one about the charts and the graphs. Okay, good. So these descriptors then that I keep alluding to, then they're in, as I said, the companion volume, but there's another way of accessing them. I don't know if any of you've heard of the global scale of English. So the global scale of English is all of the Common European Framework can-do descriptors, which have been put on a scale of 10 to 90, a more granular scale by teachers. And the global scale of English helps with lesson planning, and it helps with assessment. You can also access these descriptors through a teacher toolkit. You can even access teaching resources. But I'm just going to show you what I mean here before moving on by going into the global scale of English. Okay. So the website is english.com/GSE. That's where I've just gone here. And I'm going to get the free teacher toolkit. I'm going to access it. Okay. And I'm going to, here it is, here's my teacher toolkit. Let's have a look. I teach adult learners, and I'm interested in mediation today. Now mediation, if you can kind of follow what I'm doing, we can get the descriptors for each of those sub-levels on that chart I showed you at the start of the webinar, or I can just click on all of them. So I've clicked on mediation. Okay, choose. And I'm interested in seeing the descriptors for the B1 level. Perhaps that's the level that I teach. Here we go. And I want to show the results. So there are 49 descriptors at this level. Okay, I want to download them. Oh, I need to select them first. And I can download my descriptors as a PDF. Let's just wait for that to download. Here we go. should pop up automatically. Okay, so here I've got my PDF with my Global Scale of English download. And here I've got all my descriptors mapped to the Global Scale of English. I'm just going to stop on one. And I'm just going to refer to one. So if the descriptor I'm looking at here is can take notes as a list of key points during a straightforward lecture, provided the topic is familiar and the lecture is formulated in simple language and articulated clearly. That's a B1 descriptor. And that was a descriptor we were working on in the lesson that we did together. Okay, we were moving towards proficiency in that learning objective. Okay, so there you go. So that's one of the places you can find the descriptors, the Global Scale of English. All right. Let's, there you go. English.com/GSE is where you need to go there. Okay, so in the last kind of 23 minutes, as I see we have left, I'm going to move from developing mediation subskills to mediation tasks. Okay, to mediation tasks. So one way of if you like, of creating a mediation task, or one steps that are involved in, one way of looking at the steps involved in a mediation task is the following. This is an approach we've adopted in our course, where I think it's most mediation tasks in official language schools in Spain have done something like this. Okay, so let's have a look. So for mediation then, we need to have some kind of background scenario about somebody who needs some information but can't access it properly for what could be a number of reasons. Okay. We need an input text. So where we, the mediator, are going to get that information from. And this text could be, well, it could be a written text, it could be a spoken text, it could be a listening. It could be a graph, as we've said, it could be a chart, an infographic, it could be a video. So the material could be a number of things, multimodal. Then some kind of selecting information from that input, okay, based on the background, based on the scenario, okay. Then we may need to modify the message to our interlocutor, maybe put it in an appropriate register, take into account perhaps cultural references that might need explaining, paraphrase, and then a sort of a delivery of that message. So that's one way of looking at a mediation task. Okay. Well, multimodal, so it could be in a variety of those text types, if you like. Okay, is what I mean in the chat box there. So think of the activity that we did before. Think of the activity that we did before. Did that fulfill all of these well, requirements, if you like, or steps? Well, let's have a look. It didn't really have the background information. It wasn't like, oh, your friend is thinking of going on a walking holiday and he can only walk this far every day and he's not used to this, but he can do that. To what extent is the holiday appropriate for him? It didn't have a scenario like that. I would say it did have an input text, a realistic text, which was the radio program. Kind of I've put a sort of half here. So there was a little bit of selecting information, but it was based on the questions that we came up with ourselves, rather than the background scenario. I don't think we modified the information we got. We kind of delivered it by if you remember, after the listening, there was a gap fill to do. So that would have been sort of delivering the message, but not entirely. So I think we partly included those steps in our activity. The activity, of course, could easily be adapted to fit that structure. Okay. But it's also fine to use it as it is. Not every task needs to become a mediation task. It's just about being aware of that we are developing different sub-skills in our general teaching. And one way of knowing that, or one way of looking up the mediation skills you're developing in this case is by using a mapping document. So this is a mapping document from the course roadmap, which I've mentioned. So what it has here is this mapping document kind of goes through the activities in the course and maps them to mediation descriptors. So explains which mediation skill you're developing in each of those activities, even if it's not a mediation activity per se. Okay, and of course, once you get to grips with mediation and get to grips with what it involves and the descriptors and the sort of overall areas of the descriptors, then you'll be noticing it in a course book or yourself, and indeed creating activities. But this is a mapping document. Okay. Okay, you're going to move on to, as I said, a full mediation task, which goes by the structure I've just outlined. Okay, so these are the vital statistics of the task, as it were. We can see the mediation descriptor we're trying to develop in this lesson, and ultimately what the students have to do is a blog post. Okay. Okay, moving on. Right, before you read the scenario, I'm going to get you to read it, but before you read the scenario, I'd like you to pick out some details from the scenario here. And those details are in the 4 questions. So who needs the information that you need to pass on? Why can't they access it directly themselves? What's the input text for the students? And what's the output text they're supposed to produce? Okay, so in the chat box, I'll give you just a minute to read the text and then see if you can answer those 4 questions based on the scenario. Okay, off you go. Okay, anyone got an idea on the first one? Who needs the information? Yeah, David. David, who's in the Human Resources department, and of course, well, his staff as well. So the staff in the company. First of all, David. Yeah, David, HR department / staff. They're the ones that need the information. Why can't they access it directly? I think this one's a little bit tougher. Maybe they can access some of it directly, but not all of it. About number 2, any thoughts? Yeah, cultural barrier. They're from the UK, so Isabel, right? So maybe they can access the information about the British culture, but they need you to provide the information about other cultures. Okay, good. The input text here. What's the input text? The podcast, isn't it? For the students, they've got a podcast to listen to, and the output text, as we said at the start, is the blog. Stephanie, thank you. Okay. So this was, if you like, this was our background, wasn't it? Thinking of our steps before, and following on in a minute, we'll have an input text. But before getting to grips with that, we're going to do a warm up, as you might expect to do in class. So again, I'm just going to get you to just read number one, question number one. Don't have to worry about number 2 and 3. So question number 1, and read the 6 bullet points. Just let you read them. So, and we're going to do a little task here. In the chat box, can you please write, choose one of those 6 situations, and you write a number in the chat box to show which situation it is. Then choose the culture that you identify with. It could be your country, it doesn't have to be. And then perhaps you can come up with a trait that you think others should be aware of. Okay, so I'm going to do an example here. So I'm writing in 3 British, we might give positive feedback even if we aren't convinced, just to be polite. Okay. So I think that's something we do on the whole. Okay. So again, there's people in this webinar from lots of different countries, so it'd be fantastic to learn something about one another. So I've done a sort of a model in the chat box there. I wonder if any of you can follow on with something from your culture. Envy is the national sport in Spain. Interesting, Marta. Okay, so this, going to Marta, I think the Spaniards are more likely to give negative feedback than positive. It's very interesting from Jessica, allergic to giving negative feedback. So really dressing something up more than the Brits. Okay, that's interesting, Jessica. Okay, Erica, I'm not sure what culture you're from, wherever it is. You don't talk too much at parties, use just so superficial things. No, in Costa Rica, I was there a couple of summers ago, Sergio, beautiful place. You're likely to invite people to your home. And in Croatia as well, we'd expect guests to bring something, bring some food. Interesting. In Bosnia, we talk too much. Okay, very interesting. Okay. Thanks very much for all your suggestions in the chat box. It's great to hear about, customs from around the world. I'm gonna move on. Okay, so asking the students what about their experience of their culture, or the culture that they identify with, or culture they know well. So you can, of course, we're bringing our own experience, bringing other sources. So I'll give you an example here. What's the problem here? Why is this chap with the dog not helping the man who's drowning? He needs help. Why is he not helping him? Anyone tell me the problem by putting in the chat box? Yeah, the other guy's not asking nicely, Marta says. It's being too direct. Yeah, so I'll show you what he should have said. Okay, he's not being polite exactly. So, I mean, this is about British politeness, isn't it? It's an exaggeration for a humorous cartoon, but there's a kernel of truth there as well, I believe. Okay, moving on. It's not ideal. This is something I find myself saying a lot, and I think it can be, generalized to the Brits and to a greater or lesser degree. Something like the end of the world here, the world's exploding, we might say, it's not ideal, when we really mean, it's the end of the world, okay? Moving on, es interesante. So when I first got to Spain, my mother-in-law made me some pig's ear. Now, I love Spanish food. It's wonderful. But this is one of the few things I didn't like. And she asked me what I thought. And I responded, es interesante. And she's never forgotten this. She found it very, very funny. She often reminds me of it. She found this approach at this sort of attempt at diplomacy noteworthy. Perhaps she wouldn't have said that herself. Sorry. Okay, we Brits, as I alluded to before, have a reputation for saying sorry and for being polite. So an example I'm going to give you is something that I've experienced myself when it's walking down the aisle of a train. So walking down the aisle of a train, someone's coming in the opposite direction, and there's a problem here because two people can't fit through that aisle. So you're approaching the person. What do? You say, sorry, sorry, and then you try to squeeze past, sorry, sorry, move along, sorry, and then carry on walking through the train. Maybe saying sorry, you know, a number of times, and that's actually something that happened to me, and I think it's something that tends to happen in Britain. This sort of saying sorry. But I'm going to move on now to the tendencies I've noticed in my adoptive country, which is Spain. Verbal communication is often accompanied with physical gestures. So you might be more likely to touch somebody in a personal greeting, might be reassuring them, congratulating them, or for other reasons. And I personally like what I consider to be a warmness, but I do every now and then see a Brit who is fresh off the boat and they're not used to this, and they sort of recoil a bit or shrink back because their, you know, personal space is being invaded a little bit here. So I think that on the whole, that's a difference. Okay. And then when I first arrived, it seemed to me as if my parents-in-law and their parents didn't like each other because of how they were speaking at the dinner table. I thought they were arguing with each other constantly, but really they were just examples of speaking passionately. They were sort of animated discussions, but they were not personal at all. Okay. Okay, so that's a little bit from my experience. And again, I'm just going to let you read this box, if I can give you a minute to do that. Okay, so when I discussed those experiences, I actually tried to model using tentative language, as we call it. So I tried to use the phrases in this language box, in this focus box. So sensitivity is required when discussing these intercultural encounters. You know, there aren't hard and fast rules about different cultures, and you certainly don't want the discussion to descend into criticism or even, you know, xenophobia. So the task then here is for students, which I've just flashed up, to create a table for them for their own culture based on the one from looking at the example for British culture. Okay, so come up with a table for their own culture. Moving on, they then get their input text, which is a podcast. I've actually pasted on the screen here just a little bit of the transcript from the podcast. Again, I'll just give you a few seconds to sort of skim it. So I think this is just an excerpt from the podcast that kind of backs up the thing I was saying about it's not ideal. Yeah. So the students, they have this input podcast, and then they create a table for British culture, picking out relevant details from the podcast. Okay. And then finally, we get onto mediation. Okay. So for just once again, I'm just going to give you a second to read the tasks. So there you go. This is the this is the final task they're supposed to do, the blog post, using the information that they've come up with in their table about their own culture and the one about the British culture from the podcast. That's where they, that's the build up to actually doing the task. Okay. And good. Remember the sort of the modifying the message as well to do with tentative language, using tentative language in your blog post. Okay, we just got about 4 minutes left. We're coming up to the end. What would you expect a good blog post to look like? And what would a student doing this well include in their blog post? Or what would they do? And what would a student doing this poorly do? What would the blog post look like? Any ideas on evaluation? Just if you want to just throw it in the chat box, what would be a good blog post here? And what would be, so, you know, what would you mark up and what would you mark down? Any ideas in the chat box as we briefly talk about evaluation at the end? Okay, so Natalia, I mean, Natalia sent this to the panelists, but it's okay, I'll read it for you. Avoid negative vocabulary. Yeah, I think this tentative thing. Yeah, whatever we agreed on previously with the students, right? And I think it's a very important point that Marta's raised. So in a second, we're going to look at the success criteria for the task. We're going to look at what it means to do this task well and not so well. And as Marta, I think, has rightly pointed out, you would clarify this with the students. You know, when we get to the blog post thing, we say, right, what is a good one? What's a good blog post going to look like? What are the things we should be doing? You know, creating checklists, rubrics. Very important point, Marta. Yeah, a balanced blog post containing what's similar and what is not. Okay, so looking at similarities and looking at differences. So that's to do with the content of the task, Isabel. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on just to finish, and I guess for the last time, I'm going to let you just read the evaluation criteria. Okay. Okay, so some of what you suggested certainly is here. It's kind of 3 areas really. The marking how successfully they fulfill the mediation criteria, marking the content of the work, and then thirdly, in the paragraph below, we're talking about the quality of the language. Okay, but I would say you could still mark their language, but it's not in first position. I think the mediation criteria and the content are the first 2. You can't actually read the examples of student work and the teacher feedback on the page. That's by design, but this is one of the resources I'm going to pass to you in a second. Okay. Okay, good. So that activity that we just looked at is an example mediation activity. It's only one, and it's only looking at one descriptor. I mean, there's lots to mediation, and you know, that was a task with a listening. The input could be different, the output could be different. The output could involve a role play with the students. So it's just an example of one task, but I want to provide some more. So that task was taken from one of the booklets which come with Roadmap. Each of the levels comes with a 50-page booklet full of mediation activities. And I'm going to provide a website here, which is tinyurl.com/roadmap mediation. So this is just a, what do you call it, a Dropbox that I've created. And this Dropbox has 4 mediation tasks for 4 different levels. So it's got B1, B1 plus, B2, B2 plus. And there's a whole lesson. So it's the task for the students, the teacher's notes, and the audio where appropriate as well. So I'm just going to put that in the chat box as well. tinyurl.com/road. Did I have done that right? tinyurl.com/modo.mediation. So do download them. So Marta says a mediation task should always include some cultural aspect. Sorry to butt in. No, by all means, ask a question, Marta. No, I don't think necessarily, because when we looked at, thinking back to the start, we looked at what mediation is or can be. And it does certainly have a component, which is somebody can't access something because of a, a cultural gap. And I think that's definitely part of it, but that's not the only reason why you would need to mediate. Remember we said it could be some kind of technical knowledge that somebody doesn't have. And it could be just taking place, the mediation in a sort of mono culture. So it could be me with somebody who's just like me, but doesn't have the technical knowledge required to access a text. So the cultural element is really relevant and interesting to do with the students, but I don't think every mediation task has to have a cultural element. Yeah, so somebody's mentioned there aren't for A2+. Yeah, the reason there aren't any for that level yet is certainly in Spain, where we're sort of at the forefront of creating these mediation materials. The language schools in general aren't assessing mediation at that level. So that's why, Martin. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna sum up. Okay, because it's actually, oh, it's 2 minutes past 6. Apologies, I'm 2 minutes late. So what have we done today? We've looked at how what we do in class already builds up mediation sub skills. We've tried to label them with the help of the descriptors. Okay. We've looked at the global scale of English teacher toolkit to download descriptors per level. Okay. We've looked at the 5 steps of a mediation activity, and then we went on to a full task. So I'm just finishing this idea that publishers like Pearson are making dedicated materials to help you teach and assess mediation. Okay. I encourage you to sign up to Letitia's webinars next week and the week after. She's going to be looking at mediation online and assessing. We've only just touched on assessing really at the end of this webinar, but there's a whole webinar on it. Anna's asked, is there a risk the link will get inactive? I can't promise that the Dropbox link will be available indefinitely, Anna. So I do encourage you in the next few days to download those. It's just 4 little folders with activities in. If that's interesting to you, I encourage you to download them soon. Okay, and that's all we have time with, really. It's 3 minutes past 6, so I'm going to thank you all for coming to the webinar. Thank you for your participation in the chat box. Couldn't done without your participation. Thanks for giving me an hour of your time. Teachers have got 1,000,001 things to do, so that's much appreciated. And I hope you've learned 1 or 2 things, and hope to see you again in the mediation webinars coming up. So goodbye from me. Have a good evening. Richard, if you're there, I don't know if you'd like to add anything to close the webinar.
No, I think you've summed up very well, but thank you very much, Michael, for taking us through getting to grips with mediation. And thank you all for attending. I think I can't add anything more.
Okay, lovely. Good evening, everybody.